Today is January 21st, and I'm speaking with my mother, Lola. We're making a recording of our conversation today so that future generations of our family can hear the voice of our family matriarch. And she's lived through nearly a century of our country's history and can give firsthand accounts of her experiences of what life was like in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, on up to present day. Now, this won't be a formal interview with a chronological accounting of her life experiences, but just a conversation where she can talk and tell stories about any point in her long life. Now, of course, with me being her son, I've heard many of these stories, and I might prompt her to recount some of them, especially her best stories. So with that, let's get started.
Okay.
Mom, would you tell us your full name, your birth date, and where you were born?
Well, my name is Lola Garner Chan, and I was born in Olustee, Oklahoma, which is in southwestern Oklahoma. It's a little Indian town. It was called Olustee. In November 25th, 1926, which was Thanksgiving Day. And and my family were kind of upset because my mother couldn't make a turkey. We had a turkey, but they had to go to the store and get hamburger meat, and they were kind of unhappy about that, but they were glad to have a new baby in the family. And I was the fifth child.
The fifth of how many? How many brothers and sisters?
I had three older sisters and one older brother, and later I had a younger brother after I was born. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Olustee, that was like a rural town or a small town?
Yes, it was a small town south of Fort Sill. There's a pretty well-known fort there called Fort Sill, still there today. And my dad ran a harness and shoe repair shop in Altus, Oklahoma, which was up above Olustee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now Oklahoma, I think, became a state in 1907.
You're going to have to talk a little louder.
Oklahoma became a state in 1907, if I remember
Yeah,
reading.
Oklahoma became a state in 1907.
So that.
And my mother and her grandmother and her uncles had moved to Indian Territory in the 1800s, 1870, I guess. They thought they were in Arkansas. They moved over the line into eastern Oklahoma, and but it was Indian Territory still. And my mother was born there in 1888, and they still had a lot of Indians there. And my grandfather, my mother's father, came to teach school there to the white children who lived there in the territory. And so that's why they lived there for quite a long number of years. And they traded in Fort Smith, Arkansas. That was their big headquarters. And it was pretty rough area at the time. They had Cocaine Annie and a lot of outlaws. And
Cocaine Annie?
Yeah, Cocaine Annie.
I've never heard of her.
She sold, and then there was a lady who had several sons. I can't remember her name, but they were all outlaws. And when my mother and dad my mother and dad met in kindergarten in Oklahoma, and she was really upset with him because she had on a new dress, and her dad was teaching school there, and my dad threw mud on her dress. And so then my dad left and went to, with a group of people from Oklahoma, went to Old Mexico to raise hogs and see if they could make better money. And then she didn't see my mother and mother until about 1910, before there. Then they started going together, and one time she had another boyfriend. And one time they both went to the post office to get their mail. And one of my dad said, "Oh, I got a letter from my girlfriend." And the other guy said, "Yeah, I did too." And they were both from my mother.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And they looked at read the letters to each other, but nothing happened. So, and then they got married in 1910. And the man who married him was the one that had later delivered one of their babies.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a lawyer, and he was my grandfather's best friend. And anyways, then later after
Well, they actually lived in the area that was Indian Territory. I mean,
oh yeah, it was not a state yet.
well, it was a large area. I mean, it was
Oh,
several
yeah.
states that were reserved for the
Well,
Indians.
Oklahoma had the 5 tribes, all starting with C: Comanche, Cherokee, Choctaw, something else.
Chickasaw.
Yeah, that's right. And they had just marched not too long before that, in the Vale of Tears, they called it.
Right.
Yeah, and there was a lot of what they called Sooners that came there, the white people who came in there to get land. And but anyways,
Was this before? I mean, this was
that was
after the Oklahoma land rush, wasn't there?
yeah. Well, they didn't. Yeah, that was before the land rush. Then they did have the land rush to go get wherever you landed with your thing. You could stake it out. You're in Oklahoma, and my mother and dad lived in a little house, and when they first got married. And one night, somebody bad knocked on the door. My dad had gone to town, and my mother was an Indian who'd been drinking, and he thought that was his house. And my mother was in there alone, and she was afraid he'd get in the house. And so she got the gun out, but he left before. But my dad came home not long after that. And my mother was standing in the window with the gun pointed at him. So it was kind of,
at Grandpa.
And then my dad learned how to speak Choctaw. He spoke it very well, and he also learned Mexican when we call it, they don't call Gringo Spanish.
Gringo Spanish.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Pancho Villa ran them out in about 1910, and all of white people. And my folks lived there for a while, and then they decided to move to different places where my dad was working, had shoe and harness repair shops. And they knew Quanah Parker. Quanah Parker was an Indian chief of the Cherokee, Comanche, I think it was.
Quanah Parker was part white, wasn't he?
Yeah, his mother was white, and they had kidnapped her, and she took the Indian life. And later, when they came and tried to take her away, and they did take away, she didn't live very long. And
because she had
she
accepted the Indian way of life.
Yes, she identified with the Indians, and she could ride a horse just like the Indians could. And anyhow, they were my folks knew Quanah Parker's stepdaughter, our daughter, and my sister went to school with the Indians. And when I was born, I had a lot of white hair down my back. They call it a laguno, and a strip of white hair. And my sister told them at school that her sister was born, a baby had white hair down her back. So that day, a whole bunch of Indian people came to the house and wanted to see me. So my mother let them all come in and see me. And then we lived there about 2 years, and then my dad decided he wanted to try something else out. So we went to Colorado and went to Greeley, and it was around Denver, the Mile High City.
That was still in the 20s, or
what?
Was that still in the 20s or later?
Yes,
in the
that was 1928.
Okay.
And we lived on a farm with people named Carlson, and my dad helped both the sugar beets and the farming. And one day a car came up on the rise, and the 2 drunk men were in it, and it went out of control and landed in the farm. And I went out, I was about 2, almost 3 years old then, and the guy, I saw a leg laying there, and I went over and said, "Poor man's leg." And it was a false leg. It was a wooden leg, yeah. But both the guys, I think, died from the well, my dad went out and to see if he was still alive, and then he had a cut in his head, the man did, and my dad ran his finger in there and the man moved. So my dad got somebody to come and pick him up. I don't know what it was, but anyhow, that was one thing. And then we moved into town and lived at 320 13th Street, which was the old Lincoln Highway, which still exists. And it runs across the country, Lincoln Highway.
Greeley is a small.
Right.
I've never been to Greeley. Is that a small town now still?
Yeah,
or?
it was about 4,000 or 5,000, and had the Greeley State Teachers College there. It was one of the big teachers' college, and it was up on the hill. And I used to roller skate down the cement thing down there, and then you have to run a half a block when you get to the end of the cement. But anyhow, and they had a big tower that you could climb up, and I did that a couple of times. And
So
Greeley, I had a lot of friends in Greeley, and we had all kind of different people as neighbors. We had a bootlegger, because Colorado was a dry state then, and he used to be in jail most of the time, and he'd come by our house when we were sitting out in front, and if he'd see the kids out there, he'd reach in and get a handful of change and throw it to us. And so we always waited for Mr. Thompson to come by.
Yeah, he was.
And then next door, we had a girl who she was retarded, and she was 48 years old, but she and I were the best friends. So we played together like two kids. And then we had the man who taught me how to play cards was named Johnson, and he was a bridge engineer, and he'd been in a bridge accident and crushed his feet, so he was in a wheelchair. And he taught me how to play Parcheesi and rummy and a bunch of card games, because he didn't have anybody to play with. His wife didn't know how.
So you say Greeley was or Colorado was a dry state. Well, this is in the midst of Prohibition started in 1920 and went through 33 or something like that. Right?
Yeah, it was called near beer. They had near beer, but you couldn't buy beer, and so that made a lot of bootleggers. And Mr. Thompson's daughter one time was running some rum from Kansas into Colorado, and a cop came up to the car, and they had hooch in there, and he was going to arrest him, and she shot him and killed him.
The daughter did?
Yeah. I had a variety of neighbors. And then we had a couple who were, we called them deaf and dumb at that time. And they had 3 girls, and the girls could all speak and hear. But that's why I first learned how to speak on some on my fingers, and American Sign Language.
Oh, okay.
And and you wanted me to stop?
No, keep going.
And then we had a man, Hudson, an old man Hudson, we called him. He was pretty old, in his 90s, and we called him Paper Legs because he had real thin legs, and he fought in the Civil War. And he had a little grandson or great-grandson that came, and he was about 10 years old. And they let him sit out in the front of the store and smoke a cigar. And we used to get a kick out of that.
Young kid.
Yeah. We had a variety of people. I mean, just, you can't believe the ones we had. And that's how I learned how to get along with a lot of people, different kind of people. So I went to school called Lincoln School. It was what we called a platoon school. You didn't go to one grade there or one class. You went to different classes for a teacher. You had the art teacher and music.
Oh, so this wasn't a one-room schoolhouse?
No, it wasn't a one-room school. It was a big school, pretty good size. And we had different teachers for each subject. And that was really one of the best educations you can get, because the teachers were real
well-rounded in each subject.
Yeah, each subject. So then when I was 5 years old, 10 years old, my mom we moved from the house that we'd lived in a long time. And it was Depression years. And my dad got $3 an hour. And and he was the supervisor at a bag company, and the bag was gunny sacks. and in the sugar sacks, burlap bags. And he had a big press there. He was a supervisor, and they printed sacks, but the sacks, they reused sacks and shook the sugar up. And my mother patched them in the basement of our house, and that paid for our rent.
That was extra income.
Yeah.
Your dad was working, though.
Yeah, and everybody in the family had a little job to make money. But anyhow, we had a fire there one time, and I was at school, and I saw the fire engine was across the street from us, the firehouse. And I saw it go, and I said, "Oh, gee, I hope that's not my house." And it wasn't. It started in the basement with the sugar and the fuzz, and they got it out right away. But anyhow, we moved from that house into a big 2-story house, and it had. It was later on, years later, they made it into a museum and moved it. It had each bedroom had a fireplace, a black marble fireplace, and had a little downdrop in the wall where you could put stuff in from the top to the basement. And our whole yard was surrounded by junk. It had old truck bottoms and a thresher and all kind of stuff out in the yard. And at that time, that was 1936. And President Roosevelt was running against Alf Landon from Kansas. And we lived about a half a block from the railroad depot.
So 36, this is FDR.
1930,
FDR?
and FDR came through there on the back of a train and made a speech. And somebody handed me and another little girl up and shook his hand. And
you shook...
shook hands with FDR. And my mother got sick and had the flu. And then she got well, and then she got it again. So the doctor said, if you don't take her to a warmer climate, she's going to die. So my dad stayed there, and we moved to California on the train. It was a brand new train called a Challenger, and it only run a few times. And they even had a stewardess on there who was a nurse, and she took care of anybody who got sick on there. Well, we had quite a trip.
Well, just to interrupt you, so this is still this is 10 when you moved to
California.
So
yeah.
So you're living through. Well, you were the last half of the 20s, right? The Roaring 20s.
Yeah.
But that whole thing with the Roaring 20s, that was like the bigger cities where people were. Really carefree, and the speakeasies and all that stuff. Was that happening?
Our part wasn't as wild as some of it, but I remember my sisters doing the Charleston, and those 3 older sisters taught me a lot of things. I learned a lot that probably a child shouldn't have learned, and all the music and all the songs and everything. And anyhow, I really liked school, and I was on the school council, and in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade.
And this was in Greeley still?
Yes, and then we left there when I was in November of '36, just before my 10th birthday, on the Challenger, the train I mentioned. And when we got to Salt Lake City, they had an hour layover, and my sisters got off, and they had met some boys on there. They were teenagers. And they said, "Oh, we'll show you around Salt Lake." So when the train got ready to leave, my sisters weren't there. And they came running up and just had to hold the train for a while till they got on the train. And when we got on the train, and just as we were coming into Los Angeles, the train had an emergency stop. And we were waiting in the aisle to go in and eat breakfast in the dining car. And the train stopped, and everybody fell forwards, and the red caps and everybody come running out. They knew that was an emergency. And a car had just outside of Los Angeles, I think it was around San Bernardino, that's what they called it. And there was a car that had got hooked on the back of the train and beheaded the lady, I think it was. And we looked out the window. That was our introduction to L.A. So my brother was supposed to meet us. He was in the Navy.
This is Carl, your older...
my brother Carl, my oldest brother. And he couldn't get leave, so he sent another fellow who later became my brother-in-law. And then
So
we sat all day in the L.A. train station waiting, and we had knock books. They'd say knock knock, who's there?
Yeah.
And then they were just coming out.
So
And then
so Carl
finally came, and we took us to a hotel to stay all night before we left for the little house we'd rented in Linwood, California, close to Watts. And
so Carl, I was wanted to ask about Carl a little bit.
Carl took us.
Well, he was in the Navy in 1936.
He was already in the Navy in '32. He joined.
So this is pre-World War II. So he was not
pre-World War II. No, he was on a battleship, the U.S. West Virginia.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying he was in the Navy in 1936. This is well before the war.
Yes, he'd been in 4 years at that time, and then. We moved, before we moved to the little house in Linwood, we lived in a hotel for a few days. And they had a staircase outside on the 3rd floor where we stayed. And I had just learned how to walk on monkey bars. So I got on the outside of the 3rd floor stairs and walked around the thing. And my brother was 4 years old, and he ran and told my mother that I could have fallen down 3 flights, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So. But anyhow,
so that was Bill. Bill, your younger brother.
Huh?
Bill was your younger brother.
Yeah. He and my brother. We faced the ocean on that hotel. We could see the fleet out in the ocean, Pacific Ocean, and you can imagine people from Colorado seeing the ocean. It was something. And then they had a rainbow pier which went out way around the. Ocean, and my brother and I walked. My oldest brother took me around there, and then finally we went to Linwood. And as we got off the bus and started to the house we had rented, my mother turned her ankle, and she weighed 89 pounds. She had been sick, and my brother had to carry her the rest of the way to Linwood. And then I started to another school there called Lincoln also. And I was way ahead in all my subjects because the other school in Colorado was well advanced. And so I really had a good time, but we only lived there 1 year. 1 year. And we had friends that lived in Porterville in the San Joaquin Valley between Bakersfield and Fresno. And we had an old 32 Nash. And we went over the grapevine, and when we got to Bakersfield, we had a blowout, and we had to unload all the car. We'd had the other shipped by truck, by the other furniture.
So Carl was already out of the out of the house, and you were with just six kids and your parents, or how many?
Oh, well, there was my mother, all my sisters. My brother was still in the Navy, and my 2 sisters had gotten married.
Okay.
And there was just my sister Louise and Bill and I, my younger brother. And so they changed the tire, and then we went to Porterville and stayed with our friends until we found another house.
Now, you told me a story one time where, because you had come from Oklahoma, maybe this was a younger...
Oh, yeah, you didn't say anything about being from Oklahoma, because as a matter of fact, the highway patrol was stopping cars with Oklahoma license on them and wouldn't let them come into California. But coming by train, we got in.
Oh, because you were considered Okies?
Yeah, Okies and Arkies, they called them. And
now, I'm not sure about the history, the part of the Dust Bowl. That was quite a bit earlier, when they had the mass migration of people from Arkansas.
The Dust Bowl had happened before, and they had so many that they couldn't take them. But then finally they started.
But you were telling me at a time where they didn't want you to drink out of the drinking fountain.
Yeah.
Was that when you were when you stopped at the gas station and they typed you as being from an Okie, and they didn't want you?
Yeah. We just never said we were from, and we didn't have an Oklahoma accent because we lived in Colorado 8 years.
Okay.
And we'd say we're from Colorado, or I did.
Mm-hmm.
and then we went to Porterville, and like I said, we rented a house that had an outdoor toilet and a pump in the kitchen. and we lived there about a year. And
Is this Linwood or Porterville?
what?
Porterville or Linwood?
Porterville.
Okay.
And that's where the oranges and cotton and grapes and all of the citrus fruit grow, and big farming area. And the first, when we lived in an auto court first, and we went to cut grapes in the summertime, and you got 3 cents a tray. The tray was a big piece of paper, and you put it out in the middle of the field, and you cut the grapes and put it on the paper because they dried. The raisins dried there. They were Thompson's seedless grapes.
And that's really hard work.
When to make raisins.
That's really hard work, cutting grapes and
It was fun for us kids to see how many we could do, you know. And then in the fall you picked the cotton, and you had to wait till the dew got off of it because it weighed too much, you know. And my hands were small, so I could get in and get the cotton pretty good. And we had a big long sack that was a 6-foot sack, and you put the cotton in there, and then you took it to a truck, and they weighed it, and they paid you so much for your weight. And then I went to school the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 10th grade in Porterville. And we went to a brand new school. And this was all at a poor time during the Depression. And we even had a garden at the school, it was called Bartlett Junior High. And then I was the first class that graduated from there.
Well, you had
What?
well, I guess the Victory Garden, that happens during the war,
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, it wasn't a victory garden. It was just something. They had us doing different things. They had different vocational things to do, sewing and cooking and woodwork. It was kind of an innovative school at that time. And then I went to the high school, and the second year, the war was declared, and my brother and I were at the show, and they came on and announced that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And when we started home, I saw a bunch of soldiers and going to different places, and they had already bivouacked and was ready to search.
Oh, so they had convoys of trucks that you saw?
Yeah, they were already looking for things. And so after I finished up my sophomore year, and then my dad moved to Sacramento to start work at McClellan Field, which was the headquarters for all of the Pacific Fleet.
So this is in the
At 41.
early 40s?
42, yeah.
Okay.
And so at that time, I went to school in Porterville, and then we moved to Sacramento when I was a junior, and I went to Grant Union High School, which was really innovative. It had a swimming pool and all kind of things. And then across the street was Grant Tech. And the first summer when the war was on, I worked at McClellan Air Force Base as storing stuff and helping fill orders for the airplanes and stuff. And I was only 16 years old. And then after that year, the next year, I was going to start, I was in high school, senior. I worked in the budget and fiscal office. That's where we typed all numbers, and I wasn't a very good typist. So it was really hard for me. But one time we were sitting up, my dad was kind of a jack of all trades, and he drank once in a while, and not very often, but he did drink. And I was sitting out eating lunch at the McClellan Field, and I saw a whole bunch of men from Wright Air Force Base, which is the headquarters for all the Air Force. And I saw them coming across next to the thing that had crosshairs, the bomb sight.
Oh, the bomb sight.
Bomb sight. And they had a bomb sight there at McClellan. And there was my dad with them. And I heard his cough, and I knew his cough. And what in the heck is my dad doing there, going to a bomb site? But he knew how to do a lot of things, and he had an idea about the bomb site, what was wrong with it or something. And anyhow...
Oh, so he helped them repair it?
Yeah, yeah. But it was a shock to me, what was my dad going at a bomb site? That was the most protected place, and McClellan was really protected because that's what they want to bomb, was our bomb site, the Japanese. And
well,
if
they manufactured bomb sites for bombers there. Is that what
oh
you
yeah,
mean?
yeah. Well,
Okay.
bomb site is a very important thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyhow, then after the war got over, Mrs. Roosevelt came to visit McClellan Field, and I got to see her.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Eleanor Roosevelt, and then after that, when I got ready to quit to go to college, there was a fellow there that was signing people out, and he had been overseas. He was in D-Day and got injured, and he was a real good-looking Miss Patty's father. And
oh, I wondered how you met.
yeah,
That's
yeah. And he said, my friend and I are going to take a girl out tonight. You want to go with us? And I said, well, I guess so. I didn't know him, but he seemed nice enough, and he was very good, a good-looking guy. And so we went to the show and ate out. And as a matter of fact, we went to the show. And anyhow, later we got married.
What was his name?
Hugh Hunter.
Hugh Hunter.
His dad was a pretty famous Hollywood doctor. And anyhow, his mother was from England, and his dad, the doctor, was from Canada. And so we were married a few years, and then he got sick and he died pretty young. And then so I started working at the Owl Drug Store.
And you had Patty, though. Now you have
I had
a
Patty.
daughter.
I had Patty in 45, and I took care of her. And then in 48, I was at the bowling alley bowling one night down below the drugstore.
Where were you working? Were you still working at?
I was working for the Owl Drug Store.
Okay.
And Sam, the fellow that came in, he was late to bowl. He was on the other team. And I thought, gee, that's a nice-looking fella. And so we started bowling. I had come there with another guy, and he was delivered bread, and he said he had to go because he got up early. So I thought, well, Sam was here, and I liked him right away. And so we started bowling, and then when we got through bowling, he said, do you want to go have a cup of coffee or tea? And I said, sure. So then we started going together, and we went together a year, and then Sam Chan.
Sam Chan.
And we got married. He worked down the street at Paramount Market, and we had a friend that named Lee Ralph, and she knew Sam and she knew me, and then she saw pictures that we had taken together, and she said, oh, they're together. You know, she was surprised. So then
what was Dad doing at that time? Dad was working at Paramount Market as a.
Well, Dad quit the store, the meat market, and went to work at McClellan Field as a janitor, and that's what he was first. And the janitor that with him was the colonel, was also a janitor, and. So they found out that he knew a lot.
Oh, so he worked with somebody who would aspire to being a colonel? Oh.
He was a colonel, and then they were both janitors to start with.
Oh.
His friend was the Colonel Joseph. You met him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then they found out that both of those knew how to do a lot of things. So then they opened another place for them to work, and the colonel became a boss there. And Dad worked there, and he had a lot of ideas and got a lot of money for different things that he suggested. And then we lived in first a made-over boxcar. It was nice. It was made into a real nice apartment. And we lived there about 6 months, and then we moved into a little house that didn't have a shower. And I had to take a bath in a big.
Okay, this is after you got married.
And Sam Grandpa had to go out, and he rigged up a shower in the chicken house, and with the hose and took showers in the chicken house.
You told me about that
Yeah.
a hose and a tin can with holes punched in it.
What now?
Didn't you tell me that it was a can with holes punched in it with a hose for your shower?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's tin can, yeah. And,
Cold water, of course.
and we pulled the hose through the window,
Ah.
and but yeah, and we raised our own garden and chickens so we could eat because we didn't have hardly any money. And I was pregnant with Sammy, and Sammy was born in that house, and then we decided to buy a house.
In 1950, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We started looking in 1950 for a house, and we found one in the south area, and they sold it to us. At first, we rented one, and we're going to buy one, and they, I don't think they wanted any Chinese there.
Oh.
And so they said no, it wasn't for sale. But the man that sold us the house was a builder's, and he had been treated with Chinese people for his illness, herbs, and they were real good about selling to us.
Okay.
And
this is the house on Helen Way.
the house on Helen Way. And my kids, first of all, we weren't in the city, and then we voted to go in the city. And then we voted also to make a park out of the field that was next to the house, and we were right next to the executive airport. And big planes flew right over our house and landed. You could see them right out the window, and the windows would shake. But anyhow, the kids all started school there, and started at Hollywood Park School. Each of the kids went to Hollywood Park School. And when I took, let's see, yeah, and then Patty went to junior high, and they all went to the same schools, junior high and high school.
Joaquin Miller.
Yeah, and McClatchy. And when I took Danny to go to kindergarten the first day, on the way to school, he said, I got a mustard taste in my mouth. He didn't want to go to kindergarten. But anyhow, they all went to the same schools. And we lived in that house. I lived in the house 53 years. Dad got sick with Parkinson's in the 1990s. And so then he died in 2003. And I lived there 4 years by myself in the house. And then I decided to move into a residential house. And we had paid about $8,000 for the house, and I sold it for $200 and almost $250.
In 1950, you paid $8,000 for that house?
Yeah. We paid $500 down. And we had what you call a GI loan. It was a cheap interest instead of the regular interest.
Okay, so you hadn't mentioned that he had been in the service.
Oh, yeah. Dad was in the service. He was in the Signal Corps, and he was sent to Japan. And he was in when they had the occupation of Japan, and
so he never really saw combat in World War II.
No, he didn't.
But
yeah.
he went over to occupy Japan in Yokohama, I believe, right?
Yeah, Yokohama. Yeah, and his relatives lived in San Francisco, and we used to go down to San Francisco about once a month and eat and visit all the relatives. You remember going down?
Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about Sam, about how he came over from China when he was 15?
Oh, yeah, in 1936.
Well, maybe we can start with when he was in China.
When he was born.
When he was growing up, and the village that he lived in, and what the village did, and
yeah, he lived in the village till he was 11.
Shantuk.
Yeah, Shantuk. Shantuk.
Canton.
Yeah, and there was a fishing village, and they raised mulberries for the for something.
For the silkworms.
Yeah, silkworms. It was a silkworm and fishing village, and
is that what his family?
Yeah, and then his dad died. His mother was alone, and so his uncle lived here in California, San Francisco. And they needed him to come and work here. So he came across on a boat, and he came on the Dollar steamship lines, And I knew the Dollars later up at the Mr. and Mrs. Dollar up at Tahoe. But anyhow, he came on one of those ships, and when he got to Ellis Island, they always ask him a lot of questions.
Well, not Ellis Island. It'd be Angel Island in San
Angel Island.
San Francisco.
Yeah, Angel Island.
Okay.
And so they kept him there for 3 months. And he didn't want to take a bath because there's men that were bathing, and he felt kind of embarrassed, you know. So he kept his clothes on, just washed his hands and face.
For 3 months.
Yeah. And when his uncle came to get him, he had to bring him back to San Francisco and wash him in a bathtub where they washed vegetables.
Because he was so afraid.
Yeah, around. He was little and small. And he had known everybody in the village, and here there was a whole bunch of Chinese men and other men that were there that he didn't want to undress under.
Okay, so it was just, and then a big culture shock for him too.
Yeah, culture shock. And on the ship, he really got culture shock because he was used to eating chopped up Chinese food, and he had a big steak and a potato, and he thought, what was that big slab of yellow? That was butter. And a big piece of meat and a baked potato, and he thought, well, he couldn't figure out what the heck all that was. And he remembered the man at Angel Island that was the head of it. And he remembered the guys writing on the walls.
Well, he spoke no English at this point.
He didn't speak any English. And so when he got to San Francisco, his uncle got him and took him to their house, and they had several children, his cousins. And he went to school, and he went to Galileo High School. And then on Saturdays he went to Chinese school and studied. They wanted him to keep it up. And the older people liked him because he could speak real good Cantonese and read good Chinese. And so we had a lot of older friends later, Chinese friends.
So he learned to speak English over here in school?
Yeah, he learned how to speak English, he had to learn. And he learned real quick. And then he came to work in Sacramento when after he got out of school.
After he got out of school, well, didn't...
Oh, no, before that.
Penryn wasn't...
Yeah, okay. Before that, when the war was still on, his uncle bought a ranch up at Penryn, and he lived up there by himself, and he learned how to prune from an older Chinese man.
Prune fruit trees.
Yeah, okay. And he learned how to farm up there. And then he came to Sacramento to work in the... Oh, and when he was up there, another Chinese fellow from San Francisco, about his age, accidentally burned the house down they lived in.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so then he decided he'd come to Sacramento and work for some people that had lived near him in Shunduck Village, which was called the... what the heck was their name?
Who was this?
Quacks, the Quack family.
Dorothy Quack, and
he started to work for them, and then
that's how he started working at Paramount Market.
Yeah,
because they own that, or they...
Yeah,
okay.
And then
and Paramount Market, that's was a
down the block from the Al drugstore,
and that was a market that was in Sacramento for a long time, right on
Chinese
K Street.
J Street.
J Street. Okay.
And now there's a big high-rise there.
Right, but that was right next to the Beers bookstore, and Rodney's Cigars was across the street, just for a location. Okay.
Yeah. And the Plaza Park was across over there. Yeah.
Okay, now it's called...
Cesar Chavez Park.
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember once crossing this park, and it was so cold that the fountain there was frozen, had icicles coming out of the fountain. And anyhow, we got married, and then I told you about the house on Helen Way. And we used to have parties there, neighborhood parties, and in somebody's driveway, and each one would bring something. And there was 44 houses on Helen. That was double block.
So you had a summer block party every year.
What?
You had a summer block party.
Oh yeah, we had every
year.
Yeah.
I remember those.
Well, the other half of the block didn't come, but our block did. And most of that happened. We had people who could play the guitar and sing, and we played limbo, and we had food and had a real good time.
Right. You had also organized all the kids on that part of the block too.
The kids didn't have much to do in the summertime, so there were 77 kids on Helen Way. And about half of them,
wow.
Dad and I organized every Saturday during the summer, we'd have them come and practice different little skits and things. And then at the end of summer, we'd put on a show and have different kids do different things and sing and dance. And
oh, so it was a variety show.
Variety show.
Yeah.
And we charged 15 cents for people to
And the parents would come?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then at the
well, that says something about the times, to having 77 kids.
Yeah.
Because that was all GIs had come home, started families, and there were a bunch of kids. Well, this would be the baby boomers, right?
Yeah,
and,
the baby boomers.
As kids.
Then we'd have a party just before school started. With the money we got from the show.
Okay.
We'd have cake and ice cream and have a party. And Helen Way did a lot of things together.
That's kind of a sign of the times too, where people knew their neighbors. They knew.
Oh my! We'd go to each other's house and do things, and if they couldn't be home, we'd go there when somebody came to turn on the electricity and all kind of things.
You'd help each other out.
Oh yeah, we knew everybody on the block.
And these were days too where the kids, it was not dangerous for the kids to be away.
Oh no, they could play out night and day, and the field had bumps in it at first, and then we got together and petitioned for a park, and we got a park, and we got a baseball field, an archery field, a swimming pool, another place. There was a lot of places that.
Yeah, that's Magnan Park.
Yeah, Magnan Park.
Where the rifle range is, the infamous rifle range that has had the lead problems, and that's the general area. Yeah. And that's where I grew up. And,
the kids all learned how to swim in that swimming pool. And you went to rifle school there. The kids
learned how to shoot there.
Yeah, and now they have kickball or soccer.
It's a soccer field.
Game there too, and we had basketball, baseball, everything. It's about 6 blocks long, at least, or 7.
It's a large area.
Yeah, and so it was fun living on Helen Way because we all knew each other, and the kids all went to high school. Most of them went from grammar school through high school together, and 6 of them graduated at one time. When you graduated,
right?
There were 6 kids that graduated from the same time.
And Dad played an important role for the block as kind of the patriarch of the block, and everybody, the kids all were drawn to him, as well as the adults.
Oh yeah,
and because he had a lot of skills, and he had a lot of common sense and wisdom. Yeah. And I know a lot of people looked up to him.
If anything happened in our neighborhood, they always said, "Go get Sam," and
he would take the kids on outings on the Sacramento River.
We got a boat, and so every Saturday in the summertime, we'd take a different kid swimming with us, or taught how to ski, all of them, and taught them how to box.
Oh, that's right, because he had a boxing. He had boxing experience.
Yeah, and he used to play football out in the street. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And then if you got a touchdown, you got to slap the others on the rear. Remember that?
I do. Like many couples, Sam and Lola had a special song. Their song was the dreamy classic, "I'm in the Mood for Love." Whenever that came on, they would get romantic and they would start to dance. And of course, there was always a piano in the house, so as a young kid, I learned a simple version of that song. And I still have real nice memories of them dancing around the living room as I played "I'm in the Mood for Love."
And I will tell you about the time we went to China in '82, and we rode the Japanese airline over, and boy, the food was really good, and was the service good there. And we landed in Kowloon. No, we stopped in Japan. Tokyo didn't have an airport. It was outside of Tokyo, and we stayed there for about an hour, and then we went on to Kowloon, because Hong Kong didn't have an airport at that time. And Kowloon,
This is in '82.
'82, and the communists were still there. And when we got on the train, no, we got on the boat, and when we got about halfway to Canton up the river, the communist soldiers got on that was their area then, and they got on the boat and rode with us till we got to Canton. And at Canton, you had to get off and check all your luggage, everything, and look through it. And then, well, I didn't have to, because some fella came in and a Chinese fella said, "Is this your luggage?" I said, "Yeah." So he took it and put it on there, and I didn't have to check it. But anyhow, when we went out to sign some other stuff, the soldiers we had to write our Chinese names down and where we were going and all that stuff. And then when we got on a taxi to go to the village, you never saw, they don't signal, they just honk and pass you. And, they have every imaginable kind of vehicle on the street. And I was white-knuckled all the way to the village. And,
So when he got
okay.
when he got back to the village, I'm sure things had really changed, or did the village still raise mulberry trees and silkworms and fish, or had that changed?
Yeah, oh yeah. It was a fishing village, as I said before, and mulberries and silkworm. And the chickens, they marked the chickens, they let them run out in the field so they can get the bugs off the mulberry bushes.
Oh, so things hadn't changed that much since his childhood.
No.
The village had remained.
No. Well, it has now, but at that time it was pretty old-fashioned. And they marked their chickens, different people, colored, like blue for who owned this one, and
One
red.
family.
Yeah. And they had a new house because we paid for them to build a new brick house. Because during the war, their house had gotten knocked down during World War II from the bombers. And they had a pig house where they had kept the pigs in that old place. And where they cured the silkworms, they had big wicker baskets about 2 inches high. And they put the worms in there, and then they put them in this big building, and that's where they hatch. And then they also had racks where they had the silkworms. You could smell the silkworms. Had a strange kind of dry, silky smell. And then they also had racks that sat up that the cocoons were in before they put them in the other thing. It was kind of like, it was a certain kind of a...
So those cocoons would spin
on a rack, and then when they started spinning silk or whatever, they put them in the cocoon room, and then they stayed there for a while. Then they would spin silk out of there, and the girls had racks, sewing racks. They put a piece of silk across, and then embroidery through the silk.
Okay, like a loom where they would.
And a lot of the girls worked at the different factories in the town. And
you were there for a wedding, if you remember telling.
One of the ladies had been a Chinese neighbor, lived in a different town. She adopted a Chinese boy, and he married one of Sam's nieces while we were there. And we went to her house, and she had been an opera singer all over the world, so she had a modern house. But anyhow, we were there, and for the wedding, and they got married inside of the house, and we had to have tea with them because we were the oldest brother and sister and then we had a tea service with them, and then they had the ceremony, and then they had a banquet, but they had about 8 or 10 different houses where they'd have different tables for people, all the whole village.
It wasn't all in one place. It was spread out.
No, it wasn't in a big, it was in different houses. And we paid for the banquet. And then they left in a nice station wagon, kind of like a nice thing, and had their honeymoon.
So did the different families prepare the food for the banquet?
Oh, yeah. They, as a matter of fact, they had the head cooks in the village do the cooking. Oh, it was so good. You can't imagine how good it was. And when we ate there, they'd go out and kill a chicken and pick the greens right out of the yard and then cook.
Just like that, huh?
And we had the hot pot, you know, where you all eat out of
the clay pot, yeah.
Yeah, no, the big thing, and then you eat out of there. Everybody takes it out and puts it in their dish.
Oh, it was cooked right there.
Yeah, yeah. And one time Sam told his nephew he wanted a fish for supper, and the kid jumped in the pond and swam down and caught the fish with his hands.
Is that right?
He was about 14. And how they farm the fish is they have these big places dug out for the fish, you know, like a pool. Then they have a cork in the bottom.
Well, it was lined with concrete, or it was...
Yeah, and then they had a cork on it, whatever. No, it was lined with dirt, I think. But they had a cork, and when you want to get the fish, you pull the cork out and let the water go down a certain distance, and then you get in and get the fish out.
Oh.
They started farming them this way here in America for a while because it was the easy way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a woman who lived here, and she took us to a farm down around Stockton, fish farm, and he had 7 pools. Okay. And they fish something like that.
So when Dad was a boy, he learned to swim, and he would do that same thing.
Oh,
right?
yeah. He learned how to swim before he walked, because they're surrounded with water, the river and all the pools. So the kids are all learn how to swim real early. Mm-hmm. So in case they fall in. So.
Now, he told me a story about when he was a boy where they used to fight their dogs. Do you remember the story about that?
They used to give the dogs gunpowder.
Right.
And the 2 dogs will get mean because it has stuff in it that makes them mean.
Yeah, I think it was.
And then they'd fight.
It was the potassium nitrate in the gunpowder.
Yeah,
he said that he would.
That's what it was.
He would break a firecracker.
Mm-hmm. And spill it into the. Yeah.
Remember your microphone there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. We'll start again.
And
here.
then one time, there was 2 snakes fighting, and they'd bite each other. And he and his cousin were sitting there on the side of the bank watching them. And when one snake got bit, it'd go over and eat this little bush, and then come back and fight some more. So Dad and the boy, they were just about 10 or 12. They went over and pulled the bush up, and the snake died the next time. That was an
Yeah, I remember the story. So the snake had knowledge that this was like a medicinal plant, an antidote for the venom of the other snake, and they would eat it and recover.
Yeah.
Okay, that's wild.
Well, he learned a lot of.
But I remember the story, just to get back a little bit about the fighting dogs. That I remember him telling me that they would break firecrackers into the dog's rice. And, and that they would get the gunpowder, and they would get whatever would aggravate bring the dog to be a better fighter.
Oh, yeah.
And then he told me a story that his dog, that he had kind of overdosed the dog on gunpowder, and that, I don't know if you even knew this, because he told me this.
He died, yeah.
Well, he said that the dog went mad.
He did.
Went crazy, and that all the village elders got together, and then they cornered the dog in an alley, and they lashed a knife onto a long pole, and they gave it to Dad because it was his dog, and he had to go kill.
That's right. I forgot that part.
He had to go put his dog down, who had gone mad from overdosing on gunpowder.
That's right.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, and Yip was there too. You know, Yip was Dad's cousin
Mm-hmm.
somehow or another. He was sometimes Yip didn't like to fight, but Dad would fight some of Yip's fights.
Oh, fist fights with the other kids?
Uh-huh. And when they moved to San Francisco, the Chinese kids would go down to that park and down in Chinatown over there and fight the Italian kids.
Oh, yeah. This is, I'm going to take the name of the park. So the Italians and the Chinese had a rivalry going, the different
With the Italian kids.
ethnic groups.
Yeah. They'd go down there and have fights.
Okay, so we were talking about him learning how to fight in China, and then, yeah, you were going to tell me about a Japanese soldier, right? Wasn't it a Japanese?
No, not Japanese.
Or Chinese soldiers?
In the old days, when Dad was little, in the 20s, the soldiers were the police. I mean, they're the ones that arrested people and did things, you know, and they were the police force. And one time, Dad was out somewhere, and the soldier was eating some meat jerky, and he asked Dad if he wanted a piece, and Dad said, "Yeah, I'll take it home and eat it." So he gave him a piece of jerky, and when he got home, his mother saw it and nearly had a fit, because what the jerky was when somebody got killed or died, they cut off the calf hair and made jerky out of it, out of the man. Out of the skin. And she got really upset because she was real civilized, you know what I mean?
She knew that this is cannibalism.
Yeah, you can't eat men's meat, you know. And,
so these were Chinese soldiers?
Huh?
These were Chinese soldiers that were just happened to be in the
yeah,
village?
that died, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And one time during the war, they had a man that was not deaf. Yeah, I think he was deaf or blind. And I think he was blind, one of the relatives. And when the Japanese planes were starting to come over, he could hear it first, or he could feel the rumbling. And he'd warn them all.
Oh, they used his...
Yeah.
Because he had...
He had the sense, yeah.
His senses
and
were...
he'd warn them about the Japanese coming. So...
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, and then when real dad died, he was a fisherman. He always had a pole that, you know, how they had a pole to navigate the boat.
Oh, yeah.
It kept hitting his heart, and that's what gave him. And he was big. They called him Big Kwong. He was about 6 foot. He was what is the northern?
The Mongolians.
Mongolian. Yeah, he was part Mongolian, and he was. They called him Big Kwong. And
yeah, because characteristically Chinese are shorter people.
Yeah, he was big.
And that's what.
And he was kind of the leader of the village. And when he got sick, his heart gave out on him, and they took him to the hospital in Canton. And Singh sent a bushel of money over to take care of him in the hospital. And the night that...
a bushel of money?
Yeah, it was a bushel. Sam remembers the money in the bushel, in the basket. And...
because I remember him talking about gold.
I think it was something like gold, coins. And Dad, being the oldest son, the night that he was in the hospital as Dad, he went and stayed all night with him and slept with him till he died. Yeah. And, he had a pretty sad life, you know.
Yeah, I remember another story, too, when they were on Angel Island, or just when he had first been introduced to San Francisco, that there was a British traffic control.
Oh, no, that was in Hong Kong.
Oh, it was in Hong Kong. Okay.
Well, he had never gone to a toilet before, too, a regular toilet. And he went in the Hong Kong hotel, and he looked at that and he said, "That's too clean to sit on."
Yeah, because they would have the regular holes in the ground.
Yeah,
Right?
And then they had the English soldiers in Hong Kong. That was English, British, you know. And they're standing on there, and he looked up there. The guy was about 12 feet tall, you know, and he thought, my God.
Well, it was a British
Yes,
traffic control cop, and he had the
big hat.
the bobby hat.
Yeah, and so
and red hair and a mustache.
Yeah, yeah.
And
he couldn't figure out what that was.
Never seen anybody like that before, right?
Never seen a white person before like that, you know.
Yeah, and I think too he mentioned that when he had heard English for the first time, he thought it would sounded like dogs sounded like dogs barking.
Oh, he
couldn't understand it, and it was so foreign to his native tongue that it sounded like he thought it was dogs barking.
For an 11-year-old kid, it was really. Can you imagine? To see all that, but and then on the ship, like I said, the food scared the heck out of him. So yeah, he had quite a, and he came over with Shorty, Shorty and his wife, and you could imagine Shorty's wife.
Yeah.
Well, did you know that the day that they bombed Pearl Harbor? Dad was the next one to go and sign up, and in the Army.
He was the next one?
He was the first one to go in San Francisco and sign up for the Army.
Oh, really?
And then Singh said, "Oh, you can't do that. You got to help take care of your mother in China." And so he bought the farm and had Dad work on a farm, a fruit farm.
Oh.
As for his, and then he joined. He wanted to, when the Japanese bombed, it was a newspaper item. He was the first one that went down and enlisted on the day after Pearl Harbor. Yeah. Oh. And boy, Dad was a crack shot. Oh my God. I never saw anybody that could shoot better than Dad could.
Yeah.
God. Well, he won a lot of prizes for shooting and stuff. And well, he was a sharpshooter. I have that pin somewhere. I think I gave it to.
Yeah, I remember that. The crossed rifles.
Yeah, on a blue background. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well.
He was talented, but if he'd have been more English educated, he could have done anything. Been a doctor or anything.
Yeah.
He was very bright. Right. Do you remember one time? I don't know if you were home yet. They're home then. He was talking about how the English marched, you know, how they stepped backwards and put their legs up. He marched across the floor with a baton like that. Yeah. Yeah. And, well, he was really gung-ho for America.
Yeah, he was one of the most patriotic people I've ever met.
We had all the records. John Philip Sousa's and all the and remember Sammy doing the.
Yeah. So during the war, you had Carl was in the Navy. He was a submariner, right?
On a submarine, and my brother-in-law was in the Navy on a submarine.
Okay.
And my brother got a trash can. They called it. The Japanese they send trash cans.
Oh, ash can.
Yeah,
ash can. It's the mines that they.
87 times when they couldn't. They were submerged, and they couldn't run their motors because they could track the motor from the up above, and so they had to sit around with no clothes on because they couldn't run the air conditioners either. They just had on shorts, and they couldn't eat anything because they'd send stuff up. So they sent up pieces of wood and stuff like they'd been hit. Different trash, you know, that looked like, and then the Japanese left, and then he got off. They got off the ship, and he and a fellow got underneath a ship, a boat, and turned it over, a small lifeboat, and got saved. And a Swiss ship picked him up. Swiss was. Intermediate, you know what I mean? They were.
They're neutral.
Neutral, and they picked him up, and my brother, all he had on was one shoe and his shorts, and they picked the other fellow, and on. Can you imagine this?
Well, he had to abandon ship, or what happened? Or how did
they had to abandon the submarine because they had to get out of there, and it went aground. I don't know if it was when it went aground or the other time, but anyhow, they got off, and then they got on the Swiss ship, and here was the man who had recruited him in Greeley in 1932. He was, naturally, he was still in the Navy, and he told Carl, you could go down, I have put my clothes in the locker downstairs. You go down, you can have them, because I won't need them. And he meant, Carl thought he meant he didn't need all his clothes. So he went downstairs, and when he was downstairs, the Swiss ship got bombed, and the recruiter got killed.
Wow.
And he didn't have a mark on his body. It was from the
concussion?
Mm-hmm,
oh,
concussion.
So the recruiter had some kind of premonition that he was going to die.
Yeah. And then another time, he had a captain that was named Moon Chapel on the submarine, and they were up on top, and Japanese airplanes were coming, so they said submerge. Well, Carl was the chief petty officer, and he's the last one that had to batten the hatches, batten it down. And he was battening it, and when they submerged, it threw him out and hit him in the head and in the water. And Moon Chapel climbed out of the thing, his captain, and caught him in. And he came home that time on leave, and they brought him on a hospital ship, and he said it was awful. It was they were just stacked in there, the injured soldiers and sailors, and they would look at each other like they're kind of half crazy. The war was bad, and
the shell shock and
all kind of stuff, injuries.
What they used to call PTSD.
Oh
what they call now.
Terrible.
Yeah.
And when he came home that time, he came to our house. And it was summertime, and I was babysitting over in Sacramento. And when I came home, there was Carl laying on the couch asleep. And I went, "Oh, Carl," and I grabbed him, and oh my God, he screamed, and he thought the enemy had got him. Oh. And we had to calm him down. And that night, something came by in a horn honk or something, and he got jumped up and said, "Man your guns, man your guns." Oh. And then they sent him back. He went back to the Navy and stayed in the Navy for 20 years.
After.
And he even got to teach a submarine school. I mean, atomic submarines. Oh. He stayed for 20 years. Yeah. But boy, we.
And you said Carl was real good to you. He would send money back to the family
Oh yeah, when before he got married. Yeah, and he got $27 a month, and he'd send money home. And then he said, "If you need me to come and help pick cotton on leave, I'll come home and help." That's the kind of guy he was. Yeah. And one time I remember I found 50 cents in a drawer, and you just thought I found $100 because 50 cents was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, people in World War II went through a lot. We went through the Depression and wondering if everybody was going to get killed or somebody's going to come to your door and say so-and-so's dead. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you...
And then I remember I had to catch the bus every morning for school to go to Grant from Dos Rios homes at 5 till 7. And here'd come a convoy of soldiers, and they'd all be sitting on the guns in different places. They didn't make one word. They never yelled, they never talked, they never said anything. And the fog was all around them, and boy, I knew where they were going, to San Francisco, go overseas and fight. Phew! I mean, yeah. And some of the girls from Dos Rios used to go down to the train yards there and wave to all the soldiers. They could wave to them, and stuff. But the convoys were, that's when I realized I was 15, 16, how serious the war was. We learned every island in the world because every Tarawa, Iwo Jima, all of them. It was like a history lesson.
Because you had relatives that were
yep.
possibly going there.
Well, everybody knew where everything was. And the Aleutians, well, you have those pictures. Mm-hmm. The CB guy and the airplanes coming over shooting. Boy, those are important. Those were...
Yeah, the historical pictures.
Historical, that's right. They never, yeah.
So you at home, you had to ration
Oh, we had, before we left Porterville, my mother was worked on the OPA. That's where they gave ration books out. And we had to have things for sugar. You had to have things for canned food and for shoes. And you had little tokens, and you had little paper things. And every time you bought something that needed a ration book, you had to get. I've got a picture of the ration book in my book that I wrote. There's a picture in there of it. And then there was what you call them, a V-mail, not email, but V-mail, Victory Mail, and that was taken like little photographs, pictures, and they mailed you the V-mail, and they were all censored. If there was anything in the letter that gave anything,
they had it redacted, blacked out, and then these were letters written from the soldiers.
Well, if you read my book, there's a lot of stuff in there that happened.
Okay, and then from the soldiers writing back home. That's what the V-mail was, the soldiers writing letters back home?
Yeah.
Okay.
And when the war first started, we didn't hear from Carl at all. We knew he was on a sub. So my mother wrote to the War Department in Washington and said, could you please tell me if he's alive or dead, or if he's alive? And they wrote back and said, yes, he's alive. Okay. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
So the rationing was done because of the lack of supplies and
because we were supplying all the men that had soldiers.
Manufacturing was geared towards
everything. Almost was a lot of things were rationed. And sugar was like honey, and eggs and bacon. If they got eggs in, they weren't rationed, but if they got eggs in, everybody ran to the store and said, knew the guy. And bacon was, meat was rationed, and different kinds of things. You could buy 2 pairs of shoes a year.
2 pairs?
2 pair, yeah.
And you grew some of your vegetables, and that was where the Victory Garden came in place.
What?
That's where the Victory Garden came in place?
Oh, yes. We had to raise our own gardens. Everybody in Dos Rios had a garden, and Mom had one of the best. Oh, God, she had because she'd been raising gardens since she was a little girl. Mm-hmm. Everybody in Dos Rios had a Victory Garden because you had to get your vegetables out of there. And then we'd have blackouts and brownouts where at night they'd turn off the street lights. And
okay, and you had to pull shades down?
Yeah. Oh, when you went in your house at night before you turned the lights on, the first thing you did was pull the shades down and then turn the lights on. Yeah. Well, Sacramento was, if they'd have bombed McClellan Field, because we furnished everything for all the planes in the Pacific Ocean. Everything came from McClellan Field.
Yeah, so it was was a likely target if Japan ever.
Oh, yeah, for the bomb site. Yeah, yeah. If they would have kept coming, December 7th, they could have taken part of the United States. But they didn't. They stopped at Pearl Harbor. Yeah, because we weren't planned. We hadn't planned anything.
It would have been a surprise for.
And then, if you remember, they had you don't remember. They had blimps around San Francisco, up in the air, and that was to spot submarines and things down in the water, and to keep airplanes from flying through there.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. First time I went to San Francisco was in the Christmas of '42, and. Boy, San Francisco was so nice, and they had all kinds of things, but I remember those blimps really well, yeah. And they used to have signs, loose lips sink ships. You mean, you don't talk about things, where so-and-so is. And almost every family had a code that they made up in their house before they left. They'd put different names for different things where they were, and like, did Bill does Bill get a new bicycle? Well, that meant I'm in the Philippines or something. Oh. They had a code that we kept.
That you had planned ahead of time.
But we thought we were the only one that had the code, but after the war was over, we found out almost everybody had some kind of code. And did you know the code that the Japanese couldn't break was American Indian code? They were from Arizona, I think. And they spoke a kind of Indian talk.
There's a book and a movie written about that. I think it was called The Wind Talkers, where they were talking Cherokee and something. So that
They would send the messages in Indian, and then the Japanese couldn't break that code, and the Germans either.
Yeah, because it wasn't written. It wasn't written like
never
all the
written
other
anywhere.
like all the other languages
Yeah,
would be.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they were really innovative with like necessity or war is the mother of invention. They a lot of inventions happened during the war.
And what happened?
Inventions happened during the war.
Oh, lots. Dad sent in a lot of things. One of them was about...
Dad meaning your grandpa, Gus. I mean, my grandpa, Gus,
Garner,
your father.
Yeah. He had one that he had Grandma write it and mail it into the War Department. They had radar, and they finally got a thing that they would beam that would stop the radar from getting to the airplanes. But Dad didn't do that much, but he did one where it was kind of crazy, but I think it might have worked. You take some kind of cotton stuff and put it on real sticky stuff and drop it out onto the airplanes. And that, somehow or another, that deflected the radar or something.
No.
I don't know if it did or not, but they got something like that afterwards that deflected the radar.
Can you tell us much about your parents and their times? I know we've talked a little bit about your Gus living in Mexico. So your mother Fannie. So when was? Do you remember the dates when Gus?
They went back there in about 1904.
Okay.
And
so your mom Fannie, when was
my
she
grandmother, my grandfather. No, Fannie was still in Oklahoma at that time. She didn't go with them. His parents went when he was a little boy.
Okay.
And
well, I mean, I remember
he was about 12 or 13, I guess, and they raised hogs. And then they had bushes for them to eat and raise sorghum and all that stuff. And then they had to take the pigs to Tampico or somewhere to ship them. And lots of times they got waylaid almost by people trying to steal them, the Mexican people, the highwaymen along the road.
Oh.
And they had a real rough time of it. And one time he told me a story that one of the Mexican kids smoked marijuana and he got in an accident and then opened his brain, and he said his brain was like a nut, a walnut.
Yeah.
But then Pancho Villa came and drove all the white people out of Mexico about 1909 or 10, along in there. Pancho Villa. But they all learned how to speak Spanish there. They were good at it. Yeah, all the family did. Yeah, but that was there were several. They started an American colony there. The people from Oklahoma, there was about 5 or 6 families that moved from Oklahoma to Mexico and started a hog farming place.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. They must have been pretty brave to put all your children in a thing and go to another country.
Go to a different country where there's really kind of pretty much lawless, and there's no authority, and you're on your own. There's
nobody to protect you.
To support.
No, yeah. Well, Dad knew. My dad knew how to do a lot of things, like electrical things. He could wire anything, and he knew how to do machines, fix sewing machines and big motor machines. He didn't know how to fix cars, because we never had it. Well, we had a car, but it wasn't like, But he knew how to do so many things. And people would call him and say, "Come and wire my house for me." And when he lived in Porterville, come and do this and that. Yeah.
So it wasn't. Yeah, I remember you told me a story about the guy, a neighbor having an epileptic seizure.
Oh, that's in Sacramento.
Okay, this is later. This is later when he was an older man, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
He'd go over and, of course, he worked on the railroad for years, the Santa Fe Railroad, my dad. He was a signalman for the Santa Fe, and even showed, I got some pictures somewhere, it shows them building things. But he had an explosion in the gravel pit, and it crippled his arm. And then when he was on the WPA or the SRA, State Relief Administration, you had to work to get money. You didn't just give it to you. And he was on a road construction thing, and they blew up a stump, and a piece of it flew in his knee. And so he had a crippled arm. He couldn't raise his arm up, and then he walked with a limp. Because he went to Letterman Hospital for a month and stayed from that thing when we lived in Porterville.
So he worked on, that's Work Progress Administration, the WPA?
Yeah.
And there was a WPPA too.
Yeah, there was, and then there was the SRA, State Relief Administration.
Okay.
And you had to do some kind of work. He prepared sewing machines, and worked on the road gang. And
so how was that different? The Conservation Corps.
CCCs. That was before that they took young men and gave them money as real cheap and food. And they built highways and built roadways and fire breaks up in the mountains.
Yeah.
Frank Ralph was in the CCCs. That was called the Civilian Conservation Corps.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the infrastructure for a lot of the cities is there. Yeah.
And not only that, the 3 C's and something else helped with the census and stuff, for copying things for genealogy. They had them work, and the CC saved a lot of young men. They got a certain amount of money and work. And the 3C camp was, I thought of the name of it, was down around around Porterville. And I'm getting choked.
Was it just drink some water?
Yeah. I may die after this.
Well, we can knock off if you're getting tired.
There was a lot of, the Indians when my mother and her relatives in South Carolina moved there, they were still playing with the boards. What do they call it? They invented it, the Canadian Indians.
With the boards?
You play a stick like a stick ball. There's a name for it.
Squash or?
Something like squash, yeah. The Indians invented it though, but they used to watch them play it. And one time a little Indian baby got a locked bowel. It got constipated and it couldn't go, and it died. And they mourned, and she said it's awful mourning noise. Oh, they, whoa,
They chant, the Indians chanting for them.
Yeah. And somebody burned the school down. The Indian school, girls' school, got burned down.
Now, what time period are we talking about now?
About eastern Oklahoma, when my mother was there.
So this is the late 1800s?
Yeah.
Okay.
She was born there in 1888, and they moved there right after the Civil War, I think, 1870 something. And I got a picture over there of the first white man's house built in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And Senator Gore was a blind senator from Oklahoma, and his grandson was Gore Vidal.
Okay.
And the author,
Gore Vidal, yeah.
Yeah. And he used to read to his grandfather Gore. And Grandfather Gore one time was running for something, and my mother and dad had just gotten married, and they came. My dad's brother-in-law was very much into politics, and so when Gore came there, they brought him to our house to eat, and Senator Gore and the Democrats, and my mother wasn't home, and they didn't have enough dishes for all the guys there. So they went out and bought a new set of dishes and left the dishes there.
Oh, that's as your payment kind of for the...
Yeah, and when my mother got home, she said, who's been here? Yeah, blind Senator Gore.
So he was, so the ex-Vice President Al Gore is some relation to...
Probably. I wouldn't doubt it. I think he was, I've never traced it, but I'm pretty sure. Because his father was in politics too, Al Gore's father. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they were quite a...
Now, I remember you telling me about circus performers visiting your house, and tell us about how
we lived a block from the fairgrounds. I mean, the circus grounds, and we'd go in the morning, and the train was right there too close, and we'd watch them unload all the elephants and things, and then they'd march them to the circus grounds.
In a circus parade.
Yeah, and then put up the big tent. And then my dad would go over there and talk to him, to all the people that lived there. And we met a man early on named Ace Donovan. And he helped with all the stuff. And if anybody fell or aerialists or something, he knew what to do. Ace did, and he came to our house a lot. And one time my brother, when he was 6 months old, Bill, crawled and fell down the stairs and knocked a hole in his soft spot. And Ace was there, and he stopped the bleeding. He took a wet cloth and put my brother's, I remember as well as all, and put the rag behind his neck. Then we took him to the doctor, but he could have bled to death. And well, anyhow,
Well,
then the end.
Was that the one where he quelled the wound with coal oil, or was that another story?
What now?
You told me a story where you used coal oil to quell the bleeding.
My mother used coal oil when we cut herself.
Okay.
Yeah, if it wouldn't stop bleeding, she'd take a can of coal oil and put our finger in it.
Okay, well, go ahead and continue with
the
circus.
The story about the circus. My dad told him that my mother was a good seamstress, and she was. And so they needed midgets' clothes and clowns' clothes made. So they'd come over there and bring their clothes and let my mother sew them. And boy, I was right there when the midgets and the clowns came. I got to see them. And Tom Mix one time, there was a people named Jones that lived in us. The man had gone to school and knew Tom Mix when he was, you know Tom Mix?
Tom Mix was a famous cowboy actor of the...
And he had a circus, Tom Mix Circus.
Oh, I didn't know
And they came to town, and Tom Mix got Mr. Cecil Adams, was his name, Adams. He had gone to school with him back east or somewhere. So they took me over with his kids and said, "You want to ride on an elephant?" And I met Tom Mix, and he put me on the elephant, and I said, "Let me off of here." Got bristles on their back. You know, they put the blankets on there. But I met Tom Mix.
Yeah?
Yeah, so...
And he was already a celebrity at that time, right?
Oh, yeah. Was he ever? He was a movie star, Tom Mix. Yeah, it was like the Lone Ranger.
So
and then I saw a little Eva. They actually showed a layman who had his head went up to a point.
Oh, a pinhead.
Yeah, pinhead idiot. Oh, my God. And skin was dried like a monkey. She was almost looked like a monkey.
This was a circus act? Mm-hmm. Okay. Like a sideshow?
Sideshow, yeah, Lord. Yeah. And my mother would never let me ride in the merry-go-round by myself till I got older. They had cars on the merry-go-round where you could sit, you know, things besides that. And then after the circus left, we'd always go hunt around because they had dime and penny pitching stuff, you know.
Okay.
And we'd find dimes and nickels and stuff in the... Oh, yeah, we had quite a life. I had a good childhood, a lot of stuff. And the thing that I really liked to do was, we lived near the sugar factory, and there was beet cars that went by. We'd count the beet cars and see who could count the right ones, get the number.
These are train cars?
No, not trains. They were actually beet trucks that had
trucks.
Pulp smells terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God. But it was 3 blocks from my house, and Dad worked there for a while when they made sauerkraut. And they used to put on white boots and stomp the sauerkraut. And by the sugar factory was a big couple of acres of Ladino clover. Oh, it smelled like heaven. It grew about that high. And we'd go down there and lay in that and watch the clouds and pick out clouds. And that was what I loved to do best. And my sister, Mary, would come and say, "Lola," and call me, and I'd lay real quiet. And then she'd say, "We're going to have pigs and blankets." And I'd get right up, because that's, you know,
That was one of your favorites?
You see, yeah. But, and one time, we went into this old man's store about a half a block from our house, and he didn't hear good. And he sat behind a partition, and he couldn't hear, so he had a big metal thing that was on a rope tied to the front door. And when you opened the front door, the metals would come down and bump him in the head. And so we were going to go by there and ask for some cigar boxes to put our crayons in, empty ones. And he said, I don't have any. You kids keep bothering me, you know, and none this, that, and the other. So when we started to go, I said, that guy can't hear. And my girlfriend, Alice Bennett, was with me. She said, well, let's slam the door. We'll slam the door. And I said, that's a good idea. So we slammed the door, and just as we slammed the door, a gust of wind caught the door. The door slammed and broke the window out. And we ran like a... I ran home and got under the bed. He knew where I lived. He didn't know where Alice lived around the corner. And he knocked on the door, and Mom said, what's the matter? And said, well, your daughter broke my window. And so what? And so we had to get $3.60 a piece. And the other girl's mother took us up, and we paid the lady on the hill.
How'd you get the money for that?
Well, I had to beg my mother for it. $3. My dad only made $3 a day, and they got it because he would have, you know, raised heck.
Did you get spanked for that?
Oh yeah, and I never will forget that. Then when she was, I remembered her birthday. I always remembered her birthday. It was September 16th, and on her birthday when she was 80, I'd lost track of her after a while, and. We traded gifts here in Sacramento when we had babies, but I called her on her birthday, and she said, how did you find me? And I said, well, I had looked on my computer. And she said, I said, I'm Lola Garner. She said, oh, don't worry, I remember you. We were best friends from the time we were little till I was 10. And I said, do you remember the man in the store? And she said, yeah, and the gust of wind. And then you know what else we did? Oh my God.
And she was your age? So you're 91 now.
Huh?
You're
yeah.
91 now?
91 now. And one time, like I said, there's a beanery down where the trains brought the circus stuff. There was a train bar. They loaded up bags of beans from the beanery there. Well, they'd stop and wait a while. So she and I went down there and got in one of the freight cars. And the freight car started moving. And it was just moving up to put more beans in. And we were yelling, we're going to California, we're going to California. And I looked out the window, and there comes my dad and Juanita. And I thought, oh my God. And when I got home, he took off his strap and hit me with his belt about 3 times. You know,
that's how you're punished. Oh, well, you were telling me about being switched too for punishment.
My mother switched me. She used to get the switch, make me get the switch off the tree, pull off all the leaves, and then she'd whip me on the legs. And I'd say, hit me up here above my dress so nobody can see it. And then when she got through, I'd run in and put Campo Finique on it. God. And,
But that was never, that wasn't...
What?
That wasn't really cruelty. That was just punishment for consequences.
She only hit me a couple times.
Consequences for bad behavior.
Bad behavior.
But it was something that's kind of lacking now because there's no consequence.
Now they'd put her in jail. They put my dad in. My dad whipped me twice. Once with a razor strap and once with his belt. But he only hit me in Bill 2 times. We were talking in bed. He and I had to sleep together when he was little. And we were making a lot of noise. He said, I told you to shut up over in there. And we didn't. And then pretty soon, and we pulled the cover up over us. And but Mom whipped me. She told me when I was grown, she said, I spanked you too much. But I was one that always told a lot of stories. I made up stories like you wouldn't believe. Told people my mother had redheaded twins.
And then people came over expecting that?
The teacher.
Oh, the teacher.
Came to see the redhead. My sister had a boyfriend that was a redheaded twin.
Oh.
And I decided to say they were my brothers. The babies were my brothers. Oh.
So you deserve some of that.
The teacher.
I know.
Yeah. And my mother, I got a little spanking then. She didn't hit hard, but a lot of kids got whippings in those days.
Well, I mean, it really did teach you there are consequences for bad behavior.
Yeah. Well, nowadays the kids don't get spanked at all, and they think they can do anything they want when they're grown. They get in jail.
Well, the respect for authority starts with your parents.
Well, do you remember having to go sit down on the little chair in the bathroom at our house?
Yeah.
The little Indian bench that you stood on to go pee-pee. You remember that little...
Well, nowadays they have timeout, but the kid will go into his room and play video games. It's not timeout. It's just kind of...
No, it's just quiet. He can do all he wants.
I mean,
take that damn thing away from him and they'd be in trouble.
Well, I mean, we had consequences where you had, it's isolation.
Yeah, isolation.
It's deprivation where you have to sit there and be bored for an hour or whatever.
Well, that's what Dad did to you guys. Right. He'd make you sit on that little bench in the bathroom.
I mean, that had a big impact. I would never do whatever I did. I said something like that has a large impact on a kid.
Oh, man. Oh. Well, you know what I did when I used to get switched or something? We had a long closet, and it had a window at the end, and it had a door that went in one bedroom, and then in another bedroom on the other side the door went out. Well, I'd go in there and snub, and my dad had medical books in there, and really good ones with pictures and things you move around and livers and stuff, and the National Geographic. And I'd go in there and I got an education in that closet, reading. I mean, that's what I did, and that's how I liked the National Geographic and medical books, because I got my education in there. Snub room, I called it.
The snub room. That was called snubbing when you're sniffling?
Yeah, I didn't want anybody to see me cry. Did you know what I did one time? This was pretty smart. Well, I think about it, it was smart, though. We'd do it this way. Bill was born, and everybody thought Bill was an angel, a little boy, and the last boy in the family. And they taught him to do everything, and and here I was in between, 6 years older and 6 years younger than the other children. So I was more or less on my own. And so Mom called me out about something, and she went out to hang out the clothes. And I took an oatmeal box, the lid, they're about that thick, and I slipped it over my heart. And I took a knife and stuck it in the box. And she came in and she looked down at me and she said, "Lola, get up from there." I thought she was going to start crying because she thought I'd kill myself.
So you're looking for sympathy.
Yeah. Lola, get up from there.
But she knew you.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, but that was big.
You had a nickname that Grandpa would call you, right?
What now?
What was your nickname?
Chaparral.
Chap.
And then they shortened it to Chapo and Chap. My dad called me, I think he forgot my name was Lola. He called me Chapo.
He would always call you that.
Yeah, that Chapo was like, the little chaparral and runs around the rabbit, the bird, little ducky bird with the hat that run around.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought chaparral would be the plant that's in the desert.
No, it's a bird.
Oh, okay.
It's a chaparral. It's a talking bird.
Oh.
Yeah.
So did you have a lot of toys or not toys?
No, not too many, but we had good ones. We had nice things, blocks, things that lasted from kid to kid.
Made of wood or metal?
We had dolls. I had dolls. And one time my mother sent for my sister's 2 dolls. I was pretty young, maybe 3. She didn't get me a doll. And I did something horrible. It was raining and they got their dolls and they were gone. And I went out there and I took the dolls by the legs and crashed their heads on the cement.
You're jealous that they had gotten those?
And one time my mother said, "I'm going to learn how to drive." And I was about 5, before my brother was born. So my dad had parked the car outside in the driveway and we backed out and we went to the next door and she ran into their fence. And we got out and left the car there. That was the end of her driving.
She never drove after that?
No. And one time we went downtown, and we were in an Essex. It had a rumble seat in the back, and there was other cars like them. So my dad said, "I'll go shopping, you go shopping. I'll meet you here in an hour." He said, "Okay." So we got back in the car, and Dad didn't come. We were in the wrong car, and I looked and I said, "Mom, we didn't." Somebody had hung a little thing up there. I said, "We didn't have that hanging in the car." You know how kids notice things.
Right. And that's
And
because
here comes my dad. Where in the hell have you been?
because the cars were, there's only a choice of 2 or 3 colors, right?
Yeah,
They're all,
well, they were about a block from each other. We were downtown.
but all the cars were similar colored,
Oh,
black or white or brown.
Same
Yeah.
color. Yeah, same car. It was
Yeah,
the same model, everything.
And you were in the rumble seat. That's the seat that was in the back.
No,
Or-
we were in the front.
Oh.
But we did ride in the back one time at Thanksgiving, and I got sick and I puked out the side of the car with my sisters.
Oh, good thing you were in the outside, the
Yeah.
outside seat.
Oh, I had so much dressing in me. And,
You like to
rumble,
eat.
rumble seats for fun.
You like to eat a lot.
Yeah, oh God. Vomit out the side. And then the cars used to have bumpers lock. They had metal bumpers that came out, around the front of the car.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd get locked and gridlocked when they'd have when we lived in L.A. And they'd have to get out and jump on one car and move it.
Oh, if they had an accident, the bumpers would lock?
No. Sometimes they'd lock. You get too close to the next car, and they'd start to go, and it'd lock over your car bumpers, and they'd have to get out and jump on the cars.
No, that's why they call them bumpers, huh? Because
Yeah,
a lot
bumpers,
of that happened.
that's that. And did you know for a while they had bumpers full of water? Way long in the 60s.
No,
They built bumpers that had rubber and had water in them.
no.
Yeah, one of our neighbors had one.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I had a good life and a different life, Just
Yeah, it was pretty adventurous and
yeah.
eventful,
Oh,
I just like the fact that you've lived through so much history, and the war, and then into your early childhood when
yeah.
not too long before
Yeah.
the Indians had
Yeah.
and when states had just become states, and
Yeah. And I did something one time really Mama should have killed me for. I wouldn't tell anybody this much, but I was jealous of my sister. She had St. Vitus dance. And
what was that?
Louise. And it weakened her heart. They shake,
Oh, okay.
And she had a strep throat, and then she got St. Vitus dance. And my dad would help massage her arms and legs, and my mother, so that she could, the blood keep flowing and keep. And one time I was jealous of her, and so one time they were all out in the yard, and I got a knife, and I peeked around the corner, and I said, "I'm going to get you." And here she was in bed shaking.
Oh, wow.
Oh, God. Lord help, they should have killed me for that. I don't even think they ever knew it.
Oh, Louise never told, never.
No.
Now Louise,
No.
Louise died at an early age.
She died 19 in a car
She
accident.
was 19.
Yeah, what happened was my dad, the guy that she was going with was Austrian.
Austrian from
Well, German.
near Germany.
And he
Okay.
had dark hair and eyes, and he was a second generation. And Dad didn't want her to go with him, so she'd sneak out and go with him. His name was Al Kachiva. And she wanted to learn how to drive. So he took her out in the country, and she was driving in a milk truck. He was in a hurry, and he drove, and he ran straight into him. He was on the wrong side of the road. And my
So
sister,
he was driving, or was she driving?
no, the milk truck was driving.
No. I mean, was Al?
No, Louise was driving.
Oh, Louise was driving.
Yeah, and the truck hit him, and her head went through the windshield, and the gear shift hit her in the side. And she was almost scalped. And she got over that. She went to the hospital. She lived a month. They had to take her to, she got pneumonia. And they took her to, and she had a blood clot on her lung from the gear shift. And they took her to Tulare County Hospital because they had a iron lung. That was one of the first breathing things. It would breathe for you. Well, she got worse and worse, and got pneumonia really bad. And my dad called my mother to tell her that Louise was bad. She better come to Tulare, it's 30 miles. So my mother went, and my dad went around the front to meet my mother, and my mother went up to Louise's room, and she came in, and the sheet was over my sister's face.
Oh.
And before she died, she hadn't been able to raise, my dad told us about it later, she hadn't been able to raise her arms because of the blood clot. She raised her arms and said to my dad, "Don't you hear that music, that pretty music?" And she kept time to music. And she said, "There's a light and that. Listen to the music." And then she said to my dad, "Kiss me on the forehead, Dad." And he kissed her on the forehead, and she smiled and died. She died with a smile on her face.
Wow.
But my mother walked in and found her daughter dead. Oh my God!
Yeah, what a shock.
My mother got depressed and got real nervous, and she had to take Dr. Miles' Nervine. It was half liquor. She didn't know that, but it helped her. And then Bill, one time, he was 4 years old. No, yeah, I was 13, so he was 9. No, he was 4. Well, anyhow, he said to my mother one time, "Mom, don't you like Bill and me anymore, or Lola and me anymore? Don't you love us?" She was so depressed she wasn't taking care of us.
Uh-huh.
And that brought her out of it.
Did it?
She realized, that, yeah. In 1965, my brother Bill Garner interviewed my mother, Fannie Garner, and she was 76 years old, and 3 years later she passed away. And this is that interview.
How old are you, Mrs. Garner?
76.
76. And where were you born?
Holding in territory.
Was that in Ontario? What state is that now?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma? Uh-huh. Well,
I didn't do anything but clean the house, take care of kids.
well, have you worked hard all your life?
Pretty hard.
How many children have you raised?
6.
6 children.
All to be grown.
What was that?
Raised 6 to be grown, to get grown.
They're all to be grown. Well, that's a pretty good accomplishment, isn't it?
Pretty good, I'd say.
I'd say it was too.
They all graduated from high school, all 6 of them.
Is your husband still alive, Miss Garner?
No, he's dead.
How long ago did he die?
It'll be 3 years.
3 years ago? What kind of work did he do?
Well, first one kind and then another, mostly a mechanic.
Well, Mrs. Garner, what one thing in your life do you think has happened to you that made you the happiest?
Raising my children.
Raising your children. Well, that's very admirable. Well, let's see, you've gone through 3 wars, haven't you?
World War I, World War II, and Korean War. British American War, too. I was little, I can't hardly remember it, but I went through
What war
it.
was that?
The Spanish American, 1898 to 1902.
Well, you've seen a lot of changes in your lifetime. I can imagine you can remember way back when they had old houses and no lights in their houses and things like that. Would you talk about that for a minute?
I certainly can remember when I didn't have anything but oil lamps, coal oil lamps, with wicks in them. I had to clean them every day. Clean them off and fill them with oil and clean the chimneys. We had no running water. We had to draw it about a well.
How'd you keep your food cold?
Well, in the summertime, we let some of it down in buckets on a rope down into the edge of the water. Milk and stuff to keep it cold.
It's quite a difference now with the modern convenience, isn't it?
A lot of difference, quite a lot, I'll say. I don't know.
What did you do, Mrs. Garner, for amusement in those days?
We had church affairs mostly. Mostly everything was a church affair. Go to, we have meetings and have parties, ice cream parties and singing parties and things like that.
Tell us a little bit about your life when you were born and about your family and so on.
Rough life. My mother and father married when my mother was only 15 and my dad was 27, and she was 16 when I was born and 28 when he was 28. And we went to Texas when I was 6 weeks old. Stayed a while, and we come back to the Indian Territory. Stayed about a year and went back down. Then they had another baby, my sister, Lola. And And we stayed a while and we come back to Oklahoma again. We stayed 3 or 4 years there again and then went back to Texas. Stayed 2 or 3 years in Texas again. And back to Oklahoma, and then they both died. And then we stayed in Oklahoma the rest of our time till we got married.
How old was your mother and father when they died?
My dad was, let's see, 35. He was 35, and my mother was 25.
Well, did you, who took care of your kids then?
Our grandmother, our mother's mother, grandmother both. She taken care of us. Finished raising us, grown. She said that's all she wanted, to raise, see us children all grown, and then she's ready to die. She told us that before she died.
Well, Miss Garner, what are your children's names?
John, Robert, Carl, Juanita Della, Mary Josephine, Louise, and Lola May, and William Harrell.
Well, all in all, I think you've done quite a bit to raise 6 children. And
Most of my grandchildren are just about grown. Nearly all of them.
that's right. You've got, how many grandchildren do you have?
12.
What would you like to say to the children as to the way they should live and the way that you think people should live?
Well, I think they should treat each other right at home and not fuss too much and be as good to each other as they possibly can be. That's the best life there is.
Well, I know, Mrs. Garner, that you lived your life that way. And in fact, I never have known of you intentionally hurting anybody or doing anything bad to hurt anybody. And there's not many people that have lived or that are living that can boast that they have accomplished that. I can't think of a better person to be interviewing.
I've seen quite a lot of things in my time. I've seen them start from the first telephone, come on up to the telephones now, and the first phonographs, from the first one that started out over to the TVs now. There wasn't any when I was a little girl.
If I remember right, you used to have a pretty good voice and you used to sing quite a few songs to your children. Would you like to sing a song, Mom?
I'm going to start now if I sing the first of this song.
That was very nice.
And later on, little Lola come along, Lola May, and she was about the prettiest thing that anybody ever eyes on. Everybody said she's the prettiest baby they ever saw, and we all said so too. But she couldn't, well, she's still good looking, but she's not pretty as she was when she was a baby. And she was a sweet baby, and everybody loved her. And I guess I'm bragging enough about my babies being sweet. And Lola, I hope you have a good life and that your girl gets along, and I think she will. I think she'll have a happy life. I believe that, and the boys will too, and everything will turn out right for you. So quit worrying about everything, and don't worry about me. I'm going to be all right. And be a good girl. I know you're already one. Thank you for everything, Lola. It's all for you right now. And I've got to say one word to little Louise. Poor little Louise had to leave us a long time ago. But she's all right, and We'll all see her again Sunday. Goodbye.
And my dad started drinking some. Oh. And if he'd come in, he'd see Louise's picture, he'd turn it the other way.
Ah.
Because he's the one that didn't want her to go with the guy. And he figured that it was his fault that she got
For
died.
allowing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he started his heavy drinking after Louise died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he drank some before, but not as much. Yeah. And then when my sister Juanita got married, they didn't tell my dad. And they'd been going together for quite a while. And then they went downtown in Colorado and got married to the Justice of the Peace. Well, that they had a friend that we had worked for on the farm when we first moved to Colorado. And he had a big truck with wooden side, and he picked up a whole bunch of friends while they were getting married and was going to chivalry them. So they all got in the truck. And they had 10 cans, and Mary was barefooted because she didn't go to the wedding. They were all in this truck and had Juanita and Liebert, and some of them were drinking beer and threw a beer can and hit Juanita in the head. And Liebert got mad, and they almost had a fight on the there was about 15 people, and here comes the cops. And he said, "We're taking you all in." And they said, "We're having a chivalry." So they let him go. But here my sister was barefooted at the police station.
So chivalry is like a send-off that your friends do
they
for
tied,
you?
like they tied 10 cans onto your car, and they honked the horn, or they put the bride in a wheelbarrow and you push her down the street, or you go to the house and tie 10 cans inside and put toilet paper all around stuff and put pie pants in the mattress, underneath the mattress. Oh, God. Well, that's And one time when Carl was going to go to the Navy, he was so worried about it that here somebody knocked on our door about 11 to 12 o'clock. And it was Cop Darling. His name was Darling. And he was the beat cop. And he had Carl with him, and Carl had a red bedroll under his arm and his underpants. And he said Carl was walking in his sleep. And he found him down the block and brought him home. He was dreaming about going to the Navy. And when that recruiter that I told you about and the doctor that examined Carl said he was the healthiest boy he'd ever examined. He was 19 or 20, didn't have a cavity in his head. Yeah. So
That's pretty good, because you guys didn't have really dentistry or a lot of a medical plan or anything.
Oh, God. Did you know that Mary, one time when we were talking about oceans in Colorado, she got up on the bed and dreamt Bill was drowning and jumped off the bed and almost killed herself.
Oh, she are you telling the story?
Yeah,
She got
the
on
ocean.
Got
the
onto
ocean.
onto the footboard of the bed, and dove headfirst into the hardwood floor. Thinking that she's going to save her brother.
And then when we came to California and stayed in that hotel, after we spent all day at the train station, they were cleaning the windows, and my mother woke up and Mary had one foot out the second-story window. She was dreaming. She used to have nightmares, and she'd dream, and we had to watch her really closely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and when she was little, she was the only one that had temper tantrums. And when she'd have one, my dad, she'd just, I'm crying. My dad would take a cup of water and get some on his fingers and sprinkle her in the face, and they'd bring her to.
Oh,
and when she and my sister Louise were like twins. They went together, the best friends, everything. They were only 3 years apart. And when they were burying Louise, and they got ready to throw the dirt in on it, Mary ran and tried to jump in the
jump in the grave?
Mm-hmm. And my dad had to pick her up, hold her hand and slap her, and brought her out of it.
Wow.
There was a whole bunch of people there too. They knew what was wrong. They knew she
was so attached.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did you hear a lot of stories you haven't heard? Some of them were new,
a lot weren't, but
Yeah.
that's okay, because it helps refresh my memory, and now that we're recording, it's even better, because future generations like my grandson Bodie can see this, and
Yeah.
And you know, because they, you know, you get a first hearing something firsthand. There's nothing like it.
No. Did I tell you about what happened to my grandfather, great grandfather, when he fought in the Civil War?
No.
He got injured. His name was Wiley Bolt. And he got injured in North Carolina. And so he was coming home to South Carolina. And he lived on the west side of South Carolina. Well, when he got there, he was hurting in his side. And a man on a horse came by and said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "I live in I live across the state." So the man, he was a general, and General Gordon, and he pulled him up on the horse and took him back home. And did you know that Wiley was young, and when he had his next son, he called him Gordon.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Named him after the guy who had saved him.
Took him home. Yeah. Yeah.
So the Civil War. That's so South Carolina. I would imagine they were the rebel.
Oh man,
So
South Carolina was horrible.
Your family
Yeah.
fought in the.
Yeah. Well, Calhoun was their neighbors that lived up above them in the state. The Calhoun, you know who Calhoun was?
Calhoun.
Yeah. And,
I have a friend named Calhoun.
huh?
I have a friend named Calhoun.
You do? Well, there's Calhouns that Patty knew too.
Well, that's right.
Yes,
Ben
the
and
one,
Darlene.
yeah.
We're talking about the
Yeah.
same person.
Yeah. Well, he was vice president, I think, at one time. Calhoun. He was from South Carolina.
So all your relatives, the ones that were involved with the Civil War, fought on the Confederate side, I would think.
They were rebels.
They're rebels. Okay.
And in the Revolutionary War, they fought too.
You've dated back to the Revolutionary
Oh yeah,
War?
oh yeah. I had 4 or 5 that I could have joined the American Revolution, the Revolution, Daughters of the American Revolution. Yeah. Yeah, they were there pretty early on, all of them. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of stories. Well, see, I know all these stories. My mother told me a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And her grandmother, who was born in 1835, had told her, because she raised my mother. So it came real.
You passed it on an oral history then of your family.
What?
An oral history of your family was passed on from the stories.
She gave her oral history, and then I wrote it all down, the ones that I remembered in my book. I did genealogy for 40 years, and we came from a Garner family that landed in Virginia years, probably the second ship over after the Columbus.
No, the Mayflower?
Yeah, not Columbus, but anyhow. And they had land in Virginia, and then they went down to North Carolina, and from there they went to Tennessee, and Oklahoma, and Arkansas, and Texas. And I can trace them back to about the 14 or 1500s.
Wow.
In Europe, yeah. And one lady, I found this out not long ago, they said she was a witch. They all, you know, if anybody didn't like anybody, that wasn't here, that was in Europe.
Oh, this is okay.
Yeah.
It's not the Salem witch trials or anything.
No.
Okay.
And if you didn't like somebody, they used to say, well, she's a witch. And how they tested her was they'd throw her in the water, and if she drowned, she wasn't a witch. And if she came up, she was a witch.
You're screwed either way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about enough, Dan.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure you're tired out, so thank you for letting me interview you.
Shooting my mouth off.
Well, that's okay. It's
well,
good.
Things come back from the Revolutionary War, you know, from my mother's side. And she always said that we were related to George Washington, but I don't think so.
You don't?
Might have been. I don't know.
Well, you know, it's nowadays too. I've heard that since there are many fewer written documents, letters. People don't write letters. It's all done electronically, and things are deleted.
Yeah.
So historically, a lot of information is being lost. Just
because of the.
So
that's why they keep doing everything. Because just like your email, you know what I mean? Unless you save it on your computer, nobody'd find it. So.
Right.
And how I got a lot of my information too was Grandma saved every letter she ever got from her relatives, and she had that big trunk in her with a hump on it in the room in there, and she had all those letters in there from 1900, and it told a lot of things, and I just, you know, yeah.
Okay, well, we can probably wrap it up.
Okay.
So, so you're 91 now, and you probably have
Maybe.
at least a few more years.
Maybe.
So
Hopefully.
Is there
Well, I
anything-
don't know. If I get sick, I don't want to live too long. If I
Yeah.
get real sick. If I'm just can still navigate and think.
Yeah, and you still
Yeah,
have, you're
yeah.
still very sharp.
Well, that's what
and
most people hear.
feel the same way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They say they're not real happy, but they're not sad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the way you get when you get older, because you know you're going to die.
So if you have anything to say to future generations, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, I have in my insurance policy, I left little notes to each of you.
Oh, okay.
So that's enough.
Okay.
It's in writing. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I haven't said anything to Bodie yet,
Okay.
but I was so happy when he was born, and just loved the dickens out of him. And he's such a good, smart little boy, and so nice. I just love him to death.
Right.
And then the new baby,
Yeah.
Aki's baby,
Osiris.
so Cyrus. I think of him as, I had an uncle named Josiah, and we called him Cy. And he looks, and I noticed he listens to people. I could see in the picture. Oh, you didn't see the picture
Well, I
yet.
think I've seen the video
Okay.
of Aki
Yeah,
talking to him.
Mm-hmm. And boy, Aki just worships that thing. I can tell. You know.
Oh,
it's-
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I left notes to each of the kids. There's just a few words, but enough that, you know. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that, so
Yeah.
I do now.
It's in the insurance policy.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I did that a long time ago. Yeah.
Well,
That's it, I guess.
we'll keep the generations going. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.